Welcome,
Hey,
Karenann McDonald here. I'm here with the awesome Dr. Richard Allen Miller. It's Doc Ram. We are on part 4 of our wonderful series. We're having so much fun the last couple of weeks. And you said there's 360 PowerPoints. We got 147 more manuscripts to go. And it's just
I've
like,
got tons of stuff ready to go.
I
I need
know.
an army of volunteers that have their own purpose that matches with mine so that we work together to achieve our goals. And my
Absolutely.
intent, the way I go about it, is I've tried to leave everyone better than I found them. And while I don't have a lot of money, I have doors I can open, and you have no idea the resources I have accessible.
Well,
So I just can't do it all myself. It's just too much for one man.
yeah, there's a lot. You've had such a, incredible career. You've helped so many different people and you've changed lives. I mean, you were talking in our part 3 of actually a friend of mine. I don't know if you realize, but Rex Bear, you guys, is something called the Leak Project. And I was actually way back in 2016. Oh my gosh, it's like 9 years ago. I was with Rex Bear. So if you don't know always our acronyms, look that up and you're going to have a wonderful trip down a lot of lanes if you want to look at that. So one of the things I'm just going to show you quickly here is just how to find going into find anything that you want to. Of course, you can always do a web search, but I'm just going to just show you briefly where to go with all of Rick's amazing information because, you were just on a friend of mine, Carrie Cassidy's at Project Camelot. But you guys, the books that Rick is talking about, you're going to find them here. Okay, so this is where I'd like you to go to get any of the resources and materials that he's talking about today. So richardallenmiller.com, you guys. You'll see everything on the bookstores here. You will see on Oak Institute, which is actually just incredible. And what you're talking about is pole shift, earth changes, resources. There's stuff for starting up new eco communities like Anastasia, the Ringing Cedars of Russia, health and wellness. And, when you actually start looking at stuff, even the future that we talked about is building the new, eco villages and how we look at moving the Institute for the Children. So this is something that you started, you said a long time ago, Organization for the Advancement of
Yeah, I
Knowledge.
did that in 1972
Yeah, and you're talking
when
about World War.
Boeing and Battelle and Douglas United Nuclear wanted a think tank like the one I was part of with Dr. Joe Cohen at
Right.
Princeton. I was the youngest kid on their think tank when I was at Princeton.
Well,
I was working with Roger Penrose. Yeah.
right. And for those of you, if you don't know what we're talking about or who we're talking about too, then you better look at his bio because this is absolutely amazing. You've got one of the largest curriculum vitae in metaphysics and agriculture, development research, everything from, being a former, neonatal nurse, right? I knew when you talked about aortic femoral bypasses and developing the angioplasty equipment when you were in the Navy intel with anesthesiology. So you you've got so many different research and projects in there, and NASA. You actually prototype stuff for the Large Hadron Colliders, the holographic concept of reality. We just talked in part 3 about embryonic holography and stuff like that, synthetic telepathy, and all this kind of stuff, even to the X Files you told me about. You were on this series and, looking at this type of back things, Navy SEAL. So if you haven't seen, and we talked about Ed Mitchell, there you go. It's the astronaut Edgar Allan Mitchell. I mean, you're so renowned. But anyway, even to your grandfather trained Houdini, but whatever you want to learn about from Rick, you're going to go here. So we're just going to go a little bit into, we're going to talk a little bit about radionics. So,
Radionics is a group of different phenomena closed into one package, like ESP. And
right.
ESP, has telepathy, has clairvoyance, which is different than telepathy. Telepathy is where the information is here and you move it there. Clairvoyance is where the information is there and you bring it here. And radiesthesia is how you use external objects to communicate to the physical world, like a Ouija board or a dowsing stick, radiesthesia. And radionics are part of that conglomerate. And there's precognition, where you're in, see things before they happen, or retrognition, where you see things that happened from the past, like you can witness what's happening on Guam and the bombing on Guam or something. You're actually seeing what happened, not what history says. And then, yeah, because they're different. Okay, oftentimes history is not accurate, and that's what ESP does. Is you actually physically go there because it's part of who you are in dream states.
Correct.
Okay, now radionics is something I have a whole chapter in Power Tools on that, on radionics, in a whole chapter on that, in how to use that concept of like healers that would hit your forehead and, and you're changed. That's all part of radiesthesia, where it's an external thing that happens. It's physical. Mm-hmm. And that's where radionics and radiesthesia, which is the term used in extrasensory perception at Duke University. Okay, that's the more precision, is radiesthesia. There's ESP, there's clairvoyance and telepathy and precognition, and there's a whole series of different forms of that, and that's all contained in that ESP book. And one of the things I do as a workshop, an 8-hour workshop, if you can come up with 60 people, what I do in 8 hours is we're all together. We've all done our little introduction on who's who and why you're here and all of that kind of thing. And then what I do is I do a baseline on you. I do an ESP study. I get your baseline, what you are. And most psychics, someone like yourself, might be out of 20, where it's either this or that and blah, 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 usually are around 10 to 12. Average person would be 5 out of 20. And psychics like you would be 10 to 12, more than half, where people start getting amazed, And the contest that I did when Duke tested me with Sybil Leek and Gene Dixon, I was 16 or more out of 20. That's when you get real good with hypnosis, self-hypnosis, you can be extremely accurate. And one of the reasons the first 4 SEAL teams were still alive.
Really?
Yeah, because they use intuition rather than logic. Logic gives you a gamut of the possibilities that will happen. Mm-hmm. And when you have a possibility, you can count on it.
Okay.
Okay, now you're getting the, okay. Whereas if you use instinct, if you get shot, it's because you were supposed to. You're taking the bullet for someone else. There is a purpose for all of this. And that's the part that people don't understand, and why they don't really understand what ESP is, much less one category, which is radiesthesia, using physical objects, like astrology, or, where they're using something physical to communicate something they already know. And everybody can do this. Not anybody, everybody.
So the idea of using...
Yeah, well, what I do is I give a baseline on you. So, and then, what I do is I give it a baseline on you. Then I take you, I tell you what I discovered at Mission Control. And then I take you through some guided images. And at the end of the day, I measure your ESP again. And that, there isn't anybody that it doesn't maximally go up. And I'm talking about the system works.
It totally makes sense. I'd done things years ago with Dr. Mihail Ledwith, and they were part of the RAMP, the School of Enlightenment, J.Z. Knight, and they had done the Orb Project, What the Bleep Do We Know, and Down the Rabbit Hole videos. One of the things I found in doing that, and also training with Dr. Richard Bartlett of Matrix.
Oh, yeah. I know.
Yeah, I love Richard. That was like right down there. Nothing to me, was close till when we got to that. But one of the things I found is that's why everything, as you just said, is within. And when you can do that, the idea of using tarot cards and pendulums can be interfered with. And I found they were never accurate. plus we're the subsidiary where you drew the basis from. So it's very interesting that you would bring up that point, and I could see why it'd be so important for thrival, let alone survival with the
Well,
name.
that's what I use it for. I try to get a grip on what's going on,
Right.
and even still, I will probably never really know what's going on. It doesn't work like that. That's what the dream state's about, and why there's such things as reincarnation. One of the interesting things was when I was getting certification in hypnosis,
Right.
the usual thing in doing an altered state is to go into past lives. Can you put this on hold for 1 second?
We're back.
So what I discovered, I gave the SEAL program out of SEAL Corp out of Amherst, I gave them 8 altered states in a toolbox. That's power tools. And one of them is how you change your perception of time with breath control. I go to the Y now and I'll do a few laps and then I'll fall back into the water to let myself float, and I'll listen to my breathing, and all of a sudden everything starts to slow down. And that altered state, you can take your martial art to a paranormal level because you experience it as Tai Chi, but you have precision, of very detailed.
The focus is incredible.
Exactly. And I gave them 8 altered states as tools, and it turned them into supermen. Imagine what
that.
we become if we had access to 400 altered states where the laws of physics are different. And you can do things in those states you can't do with consciousness. And I'm not talking about recreationally, oh, wow, man, totally cool, here, have a hit. I'm talking about using it where the laws of physics are different. And when you do that, now you're using your mind as a tool, not an absolute of this is the way it is, and I believe it, bang, and that's that, like Jesus. Because I'm finding a lot of the churches will make judgment on other religions, and that's not right because other religions are okay. There's nothing wrong with any of them. Basically, it's personal and what's right for you. And that's the only person you can judge is yourself. And the reason I go to church is for fellowship. I'm seeking a group of people that have values that I would like to become more like. So I don't go to Seventh-day Adventist churches, but they're one of the few religions that actually practice what they preach. And that is walking your talk. That's the intent part of it, leaving things better than you found them. What I'm doing is that I'm trying to open your mind to the possibilities of something more than where you are right now. And the more you can grok or see in your mind's eye, that's what makes things real, is imagination. Where the mind's eye, when you see it there in your mind's eye, that is what makes it real, not my physics.
That would bring me to something, and this is just in my experience again too. But when I was with Dr. Gary Young, we went down to Cancun, Mexico, and we studied all about the oils and what it did, crossing the blood-brain barrier, emotional release for post-traumatic stress, ancestral. I used it for everything, sexual abuse, ritual, doesn't matter what it is, oils are it. But aside from that, is that besides they cross the blood-brain barrier, is when I got into that altered state. I was talking to him and I spent some incredible time. We went to Chichen Itza in Tulum, but I started talking to him and I'd actually seen the cover of his book in my head. And I went to him, I said, I don't know what this means, but this is something I've got to tell you. And he said, Karen, I've been writing that book secretly for 2 years. And you just described the book cover to me. He goes, you're either from the CIA or you're an angel from the heavens, because he said, only my wife doesn't even know about this book. I've been doing it secretly. Only myself and the publisher know about it. But from there, he actually the next day put the book and announced it in front of everyone. And he looked at me, he said, and now we're going to go take it one step further. And he taught me how to firewalk. So 100 of us were introduced to firewalking.
That's shamanism. And I talk about that in Power Tools as well. Shamanism, I studied with Merciliotti up I think he was in Idaho at the time I studied with him.
Mm-hmm.
And a shaman is usually they're not the best of everything because they don't know how to do it. They just do it, like putting their consciousness in the eye of an eagle and seeing what the eagle sees.
Right.
That's what I'm trying to do, is a more physics way of doing it, where I have a B, C, D, kind of
recipe to it.
Right. So that because once you see, that's what makes physics so powerful, is that everybody believes in it. If
replicatable, duplicatable,
repeatable, reproducible. Those are the two key words in physics. And so that's what I try to do, is approach it from a physics point of view. That does not mean that's right. Well,
it's an applied.
That's why physics changes every so many years, and we have a new theory. We went from quantum mechanics, which had an uncertainty, and the more you know about one thing, the less you know about another, which means you can't get there from here. Well, information and the holographic system that I invented is the same thing, because there's a theorem, an information theory, that states if you have enough information to ask a coherent question, you have enough information to answer it. In other words, the answer is contained in the structure of the question, which means you can't get there from here either, literally. And while we get closer and closer, my multiverse model, the math I'm using, will take string theory, 10 dimensions, of which man inhabits only 4. And then I'm taking superstring, which is an 11th dimension that interacts as a wormhole connecting all 10 dimensions. And then I'm going to be a little Boy Scout, tying knots in them. And I'm going to use a knot theory where you have 11 dimensions and you tie knots in them, in terms of, in the kitchen, should I use cheese on this or not? And how it affects the entire universe.
And that's sandwich, apparently, with the string theory.
And that's where you tie a knot here, and then you go to the shoulder and you tie a knot. And that's called taking your measure in witchcraft. So in all of our universes, you'll notice there's the same concept somewhere, like your measure in witchcraft, where you go to the shoulder, tie a knot, you go to the elbow, tie a knot, and that's your measure that you wear around your waist as tying your robe. And then in magic, with a K, sleight of mind, where you use your mind as a tool, and you would change your belief systems like you would a pair of clothing, appropriate for the weather or the purpose in which you intend to do. And your intent is how you do your purpose.
So looking back at radionics, and I've been in the field of biofeedback or bio enhancement, and I went from my clinical, neonatal nurse and Dutch, all that, so then became herbology, aromatherapy, colon hydrotherapy, peristem hydrotherapy, crystal stuff, and whatever. So I, went into the, holistic, and then into the naturopathic, and then with Dr. Paul Duran, we had what was called the Integrative Quantum University. I don't know if you know about him, but it's a university that's all done with biofeedback. We brought in live blood cell and a whole plethora. So we're a whole bunch of, doctors and nurses, but we set up these other systems, right? And then I got into touch after Dr. Bill Nelson and the old SKIO EFPX radionics, and those were developed by those 40 scientists out of Russia. And they developed the first sort of trinary. So we were trivectoring people, right? Rather than a binary computer system. And so we were literally like, I felt like Mrs. Spock and Mrs. like Bones, right? Like going up and scanning people. And it was amazing what we could do. And then I got to meet with Ryan Williams, and that man is a genius. I should introduce you. I'd love to do a show with you and him, actually, now that I think about it. And Ryan has got a site called Insight Health Apps, and I'm going to show you a little bit of what he developed. And I've been using this for, he set up the first school of quantum alliance of biofeedback here on Vancouver Island back in 2004. I was like one of the first graduates of this. But, back then we didn't have schools. It was all word of mouth. Of course, they made all our radionic equipment, illegal. And when Dr. Richard Bartlett tried to bring up some of it, he called it like peanut buster and sound equipment because they banned it. They wouldn't let us have it.
So that's Power Tools. I'm going to send you that first. I want you to read Power Tools.
Okay.
Because it covers radionics in detail, including psychic healers and all the associated things. And the first book I wrote on that was The Magical and Ritual Use of Perfume.
Okay.
How to blend your top, middle, and low note.
Yeah.
In terms of odoriferous molecules and how you communicate with odor.
Now, one of the things I'm just going to show the audience here. This is my Facebook, and for those people that are available or don't know it, I'm not sure if you are, Rick, but I'm just going to show people here. What I have is I've got photos and I have albums. So what I've done is I've backed all my talks basically into here. So there's a whole section on Rife, neurovisor, and that's something I want to discuss with you too, with Garnett Dupuis, that's been using microdosing, using sound and light. And I've had to experience it. And we're now going into that, which is creating incredible neuroplasticity and changes. And then radiation levels. I'm also one of the whistleblowers, by the way, for Western Canada, for all the DUMs and everything that's up here.
Who did your website?
This is basically what I've been using as a website, and I'll go to my Insight Health apps here in a minute.
I would like to have someone doing this to my website.
Well, this is kind of fun. That's why I use Facebook. And then also, I'm part of the Bear Clan, so I'm actually the 13th Bear Clan, but this is what klanmother jurisdictions and alloidial titles were and still sit into place. But shows I've done, so I'm going to add ours into here. But aromatherapy, there was a film called The Future Shift.
You were quite a looker back then, weren't you?
Thank you, darling.
I know. I mean, hot. Sorry.
Then live blood cell we did with Dr. Ross Anderson, and I had Alfred Weber watch, but Lorraine Andrews at True Health Canada. These are the ley lines and other DUMs that I got through also Sergeant Patty Broussard from the U.S. Army Unacknowledged Project. So there's a whole things in here to do with, I'm going to talk about the Genius apps that we've got, and then I talk about everything steaming, vaginal, and then this gets into the klanmother, the kachina, the synchrotron, and of course, I was in the LHC when the CERN blew in 2016. I was simultaneously looking at the one going on in Saskatoon that had a leak too. But there's stuff that leaked. There's a breach of containment, and then we documented that at Project Invention. But Cypress Hills, which is, of course, right below CFB Suffield, that's your American, Canadian, and British base. I could talk about a lot of stuff that we have there. That's where Paul Hellyer and Stephen Bassett told me about our Area 51 up here in Nelson. These are some of the things, by the way, I used to get rid of the Queen. This is how we put in for international courts and to get arrested for crimes against the nation, the tribes, and humanity, and for treason. So these are some of the proclamations, but this is just something that, might be helpful to you, because I noticed you have a few.
Yeah, no, I'm saying how I can fine tune you in a number of different areas to make you scary.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Great. So, one of the things here, I'm just going to talk about, Royal Raymond Rife, and we've made a lot of these. And one of the things that I think that's really important is to look at, what Rick and I are going to be talking about over the next few weeks or something or whatever till we go. But there are
talk about each one of these things.
Yeah, very few.
From my perspective, and giving you another edge on how to get there.
Yeah. So these are some of the different things we've talked about going into Rife and stuff, how important these things are, the light spectrum. I've done thermal imaging when, of course, we've had direct energy weapons and been around things, or people have been in here using natural plants where I'll capture the frequency. This is actually teaching people instead of using drugs and pharmaceuticals. That's my little Hopi sacred tobacco plant in the back. And what we did is it's been converted into an essential oil and also into tinctures rather than using metamaterials and are the pharmaceutical and the AI technology that they're putting into ivermectin and all of these other drugs that people want to just keep being pharma horse for.
Yeah.
But here's actually just an example of how we capture it through the Tesla plates. And then what we're doing, is teaching it is the biofield. And of course, I'm a friend of Sabrina Wallace, so I'm a synergist as well. And I've helped teach their groups and stuff here. But this is very important. That's why when people talk about live blood cell and using these zeolites and everything else that have got metamaterials in them, they're actually the silica-based forms that are actually building the nanotechnology and this transhumanism stuff, because I want you to see how narrow the spectrum is. You're seeing a very mild percentage of what, is out there. So again, just going into what you would call traditional Chinese medicine. So my scanner can take each one of these, and I've helped develop the program. So I'm the one that wrote the bio warfare and venoms.
This will be fun to work with you on some of this stuff.
So this is where kind of I went into. And for example, with the fog, we got serratia. And so that serratia, Marcinians is what's in the fog. So again, bioweaponized. And this is where I get into the biofeedback, because people are transferring things. They have very little idea of what's called contagious contact vaccinosis,
Right.
pH plasma getting in here. We've got some great technologies and stuff I've played with. Lefkowski's fields, these are the biofiller things. And I've been using a lot to potentize the water, because I'm at one of the top Valhalla mountains with the top springs in the world, glacier here in the Kootenays. So again, these are very, very, another University of Saskatchewan grad, by the way, Dr. Hulda Clark. Just getting people educated what we can do. And of course, Sabrina Wallace is very famous with teaching all the metamaterials and the wideband, medical band, and the military communication systems in there that people have no idea what's coming down the pipes. And that's why I think it's so important with what you've got. So what I went into here was looking at doing the biofeedback, that we could put these for self-analysis through voice and picture. And I'll do a few minutes here to show you what your aura looks like today, because I think it's exciting. But that's where we take food and we could actually scan the food, scan supplements, see if there's anything untowards in there that could cause side effects, and re-imprint, almost like a replicator technology. And again, I only, after qualifying people properly, because most people don't know intake or medical intakes with their ass in a hole in the ground. And what will happen is they're putting people on. And so if you put these kind of, as neodymium and magnetic therapy and PEMF on people that have got pacemakers, the same that people have been injected, you will put them into a turbo cancer and hasten their demise. And I've seen people go into congestive heart failure using these terahertz and zeolites and all sorts of stuff. So this is actually one of the ones, just to let you see here. This is the serratias I've put in for all of our therapists worldwide, because we're missing that.
By the way, Morgellons, I tell you what Morgellons is. It is nematode.
Yeah.
In the nematode experiment that blew up in the Challenger, what happened is it mutated with bacteria up in the ionosphere, and when it fell to Earth, it created Morgellons. And basically, Morgellons is easily approached or solved or cured using just simple nematode worm therapy. That's what they are, worms.
Exactly. And so, this is one of the things that's why I went into this. I just did some shows with Ryan Velli. I think he's amazing. That's one of the people I've recommended do some shows with you. He's like our AI nano Skynet,
Now I can add your scientific part to all of those things that you've done as another edge on how to grok what to do next.
Excellent. And one of the things I'm going to go in here, I'm just going to show you a little bit, just to give you a taste of what I'm kind of playing with here. And so I'm just going to show you my iPad here, which is, I keep them as medical devices. And of course they can run off grid once I've got the software down, and I don't need any of that. So this would be, for an example, my iPad here. And we've got, like I just showed you, that Rife. You can put in whatever you want, A to Z, and we can run up to 20,000 megahertz. So you just pick up whatever you want, A to Z, and it will have the Rife codes in it. We've got another BioVibe, and some of these start as low as $15, right? Not 15, 20,000. My first investment with, Dr. Bill Nelson was over 50 grand for my clinic. So in the old days, we were like programmers, and Ryan's the granddaddy of all this. So what we did is we've gone into emotional stuff. We're putting fractals, and what he developed was the Genius Insight. And so, for example, what I would do is have you do your voice, A-E-I-O-U, A-E-I-O-U for 15 seconds, and it will correlate basically for fast Fourier technique into what we would call an algorithm, and that algorithm is amazing on the technology. So what we're looking for, the deviations, which will be red and blue, which will be outside the bell curve. And so every device is different. depending on the therapist here. And I've invented 4,000 different data banks. So I'll just show you a little bit of what I've done and then in there. But
Amazing. It'll be interesting to continue working with you.
thank you. And then the voice, what it does is it correlates with the platonic solids. So now we've got a holographic signature, basically like a soundboard. And so once we've captured, like I showed you the plant, we can now, like muscle testing or kinesiology, go in and take a look at it. So I don't have to run a current through someone and maybe put them into turbo cancer, or you don't know, with all the amount of graphene, heavy metals and stuff in people, that is self-replicating. And now that they just developed the self-replicating RNA technology, we don't have a reverse engineering for any of this. And so this is what I really want to look at, because under, our techniques, we can take a look. So I took a picture of you, and I want to show you how beautiful you are.
What?
Okay, so we look at people here, as you can see, the different rings, and the more vibrant we are, the more intense we are. And of course, that's an intense vibration. I was like, whoa, this man knows what he's talking about, right? It's not washed out. You're not drained. Like, you are holding your own. I went, I hope to look that great at 81. Anyway, he just had his birthday, by the way, his born day. Sorry, special appearance. Anyway, so what we're seeing is, again, looking in there, and I'd go to clean up a little bit just on the outside. And sometimes the people are under, direct energy weapons, 5-6G, Wi-Fi, whatever it might be, you'll see a weakening in the field. The other thing that I found that was just incredible is, look at that. Mine looks like a hot pink, flamingo too. And it's like, oh my gosh. But in there, I can see the acupuncture lines, things going through the stomach meridian, or there's some issues in the lower part of the left side of the body. So knees up through there. And I want to get that cleaned out. So that's
what? All my injuries are on the left side of my body. Like,
yeah.
There's no bone in this arm.
Yeah.
And I've got my hip titanium, my arms titanium, the side of my head is titanium, all the way down. I've got titanium on the left side more than the right.
Do you see it? Are you impressed now?
In any case, isn't that interesting?
I love Ryan. So one of the things we did is we all get to co-write the software. He gave us like the cake, and we get to like flavor it however we want. So in here, we can look at different issues. Let's say, and I love Dr. Debbie Drake, what she did. She made a bioterrain. So let's say we want to just look at the retroviruses. Where did you ever go to a doctor and get bloody well tested for the bioweapons here? Okay, and so we can have some really fun things in here. Acid alkalinity, going into the parasites. People have no clue when we see what's been weaponized against them. So we can just see what is showing up red, that's up in the biofield, that, again, they're raining on our parade. And we can start going in and start looking for the codes. And so I call it like, instead of an antidote, it's an antinote, because we're using sound.
Wow.
So one of the things, and I'll just show you a little bit of the ones I invited and into people, just to be open. Let's say if I wanted to do live blood cell, and I've done water shows with Robert Young, by the way, and was in some of his groups. But let's say if there's any platelet or clumping or clotting, or we're going to see some canocytes through the shedding. The other thing too, we've got a lot of stuff. I like working with the children. And there's stuff we had for sexual abuse and ritual abuse, ICAR codes, blood things, kuru, all sorts of things we might be looking for. And then I did a whole thing on radiation, and I've done my labs and everything else. The fog, there's my stuff for the serratia, toxoplasmosis, transgendering our children, okay, nanobacterias. And then again, how to appropriately go in and use what herbs and oils. So, for example, pine needle tea might be one of the top things.
Oh, really interesting.
Reseeding mushroom. Yeah. And you can see all the things here. If there's bleeding, gamma radiation, what it's doing to the cognition when we've had leaking from the dumbs, and all their little things here. So a plethora of different things. And let's say if someone liked Young Living or something, or they have a certain essential oil blend or whatever, we might want to go in and just take a look at what kind of blends people have, or single oils, or whatever we want. So anything I can think of, I coded in here, I've put into here. So the cool thing is we have a medicine tray, and all I have to do is go, I'm going to give you some spearmint and some endoflex, and now I'm going to put all the remedies in for you. So this is the cool thing. I love traditional Chinese medicine. So let's say the weakest meridian on you is the gallbladder. I could go open up the gallbladder line, and there we go. Within seconds, I am now doing soundless and surgical free acupuncture,
Huh.
which it can go in here. So we can do the same thing. So each one of these categories, whether you want to do a chakra realignment, you want it to.
This is unbelievable. I'm really interested in what you're doing here. This is unbelievable. I'm
So,
impressed.
well, credit to definitely Ryan Williams. He was with the South African Army, by the way. So
I'm going to be sending you some pictures to use also in some of your stuff. I've got physical pictures of work I've, and the laboratory equipment I have right now is Autogen Biofeedback, state of the art, top end. I've got everything, and I've got Mora and Endomet German acupuncture equipment in storage for the children's thing.
this is amazing. So whether you want to look at the spine, you want to look at the head, you want to look at anatomy, we can look at people physically, mentally, emotionally, sensitivities, EMF. And like I said, even here, you could go to here and start doing this instead of a chiropractor.
Huh.
So if I took this off, and we've only got about a minute left, so I think if you're open, we can do one more part for about half an hour.
Sure, please.
So what we do is I'm going to actually put this through here, and it will organize everything in this tray for me, and then it will tell me what comes up to the top for you, and then I can do it with or without sound. And again, we can do it with headphones if people have been
Perfect. Great.
just run sound waves. Otherwise, we got neodymium magnets, and Ryan came up, and Dr. Debbie Drake with some of the new PEMF equipment that you can turn it into. Instead of that $6,000, for a couple $100, we can do this directly on the skin. And so this will increase the nitric oxide 700%. So I was off crutches in 4 days, not 4 weeks.
Amazing.
So let's meet in 5 minutes. And you guys, you're going to have to wait for our next part.
And that will be really interesting because when you start doing these therapies on me, then we'll see how much I've changed.